Hello and welcome to Audiovisual Cultures, the podcast that explores arts and culture production. I'm Paula Blair and I'm delighted to be joined this time by artist Zhenya Marie Nau, who very kindly shares her experiences in working across various art forms, including documentary and short film in Northern Ireland. Very warm thanks to our members on patreon.com/avcultures for your continued support. For other ways to help fund the podcast and to keep up with our goings on, listen to the end for details and do enjoy this really fascinating chat with Zhenya. Zhenya, if you're happy to, would you tell us who you are?
My name is Zhenya, as you said.
Sorry, I'm
Lots of people. No, you said it beautifully. You said it actually really well.
Oh, thanks.
Perfectly. I've heard all kinds of variations of my name, and I just smile. My full name is Zhenya Mahdi Nau. So Zhenya is a Russian name. My mum was born in Russia, so I got the name Zhenya, which incidentally means genius.
Well, obviously.
Oh, well, you know, they knew a thing or two. Mahdi is my parents, my maiden name. And Nau is a German name because I was married to somebody who was from Luxembourg, so I kept it on because of my son. And so there's Russian, Persian, because I was born in Iran and sort of brought up in England. Went to school there and my first lot of studies there. So
we've got Tessa here as well, just in case we hear doggy noises.
Yes, Tessa's my girl, my border collie, my sweetheart.
Very, very friendly girl.
Yeah.
And so, Zhenya, if we could try and describe who you are, because you're a filmmaker, an artist, an educator, all sorts of things. You do a lot of different things.
I mean, I suppose if I'm looking back at the stuff that I've done, it's very difficult to just pinpoint one thing.
Yeah.
The thread in them has been creative arts in some way. Yes, I have been quite involved in training and teaching and developing sort of educational resources that were creative and have dabbled into filmmaking, and that's how obviously we met. But drawing and painting has always been a part of it as well. And some singing.
Singing, yes, because we'll get on to that in a while.
Yes.
And dance as well, it's very important to you. Is it
dance
more working with dancers?
Yeah, dance is important, not because, in my head I'm a dancer.
Well,
my body not quite.
I know what I'm saying.
Yes, when I close my eyes, I'm capable of doing all kinds of pirouettes and all sorts of things. Yeah, I've had a fascination with dance and movement and how the body, I just find the body is almost like a metaphor for something, for higher consciousness, of something very beautiful and innate in us, rather than just a physical thing. So I love the metaphors that happen between movement and emotional states. And from a very long time ago, I tried to draw it and capture it in some way, and the idea of movement and something very ethereal that happens in it all. And again, more recently, I'm trying to see whether I can start a project of some sort.
I suppose we can begin then with talking about Tapestry of Colours, your documentary, because that is how we met. Feels like a life ago.
Yeah.
One of my other lives and probably one of your other lives as well.
I think so,
yes.
Well, it was 2012, the summer of 2012, that I was editing Tapestry, and it screened the first time in September of 2012. And I think it wasn't long after that we met. I mean, that was a mammoth project for me, because before that I'd made a short film and I'd worked with editing and training people in editing. I used to work with in the Nerve Centre in Belfast, and that's where I began to learn more about editing and filmmaking. Tapestry was the first time that actually really I managed to get some funding, which would never cover the kind of work that you want to do, but it really was a labour of love and something that was of real interest to me, but a subject that was just exploring how cultures are arriving in Northern Ireland and how there is a sense of integration. I wasn't looking for the conflict areas, I was looking for the integration areas and see where there could be human stories rather than facts and figures.
It was great, I think, when we met. It was through the youth group at the QFT, so it felt really appropriate actually that it was through that younger generation who were born after the official end of conflict here. And it was feeling at the time, I'm not sure about now, but it was feeling at the time like a new Northern Ireland. I feel like I straddle old and new, and then I don't live here anymore. So I think so much of the film is so much to do with identity and all the intricacies of identity. So it was really important, especially growing up in such a very white place.
Yeah.
And it's great to see so much diversity here now, but I just didn't experience that when I was younger. Even the film educated me on how much diversity there was, because I didn't know there were all these communities everywhere else. So that was really important. But yes, just important for the communities, scare quotes, in Northern Ireland to realise they're not the only communities.
Yeah.
It's not just about those two. And there are more to what's going on here than sectarian divisions, and there's more to overcome than just sectarian division.
One of the things that I found was there is, I think, an underlying belief that people, if you come from a certain area, then you're likely to share the same thoughts and beliefs and ideals, and pretty much, you're that bunch and here is this bunch. Just like, here in Northern Ireland.
Yes.
Here are the Catholics and here are the Protestants and here are the Loyalists and here are the Nationalists. Whereas reality is that these are just names and labels that we give to human beings. I've never felt comfortable with the idea of groups being given an identity that bypasses the individuality of the people that are within that group. And I think that is something that I've found over and over again. I've come across it again and again with all kinds of backgrounds and cultures. It isn't unique to Northern Ireland. It's something that happens everywhere. And I think partly because people feel comfortable with that, and not everybody wants to particularly feel an individual within a group. And I do. So I'm particularly conscious of that and sensitive to that. But also partly because it's an easier way to address a whole group of people instead of thinking about their individuality. It's a lazier way to address humanity of someone. And I came across that over and over again where people would either, in Tapestry of Colours, there are some uncomfortable conversations.
Yes,
It was very difficult to get those uncomfortable conversations because people don't always want to say what they feel. And it was an interesting thing to find somebody who was able to do that, was actually saw nothing wrong with that, which was great for me. So it meant I could get it on, recorded, and she was very happy for that. And I think for her it was having a voice, which was good. But in a sense I thought it was quite naive as well to actually assume that this is okay, or that this will be perceived generally okay. So all kinds of dynamics were going on, but what I found was most fascinating is always to find prejudice where you least expect it and find open-heartedness where you least expect it. That's the beauty of things, I think, as well. And I did find that over and over again where you thought really it's likely from the background that this person comes from educationally, socially, culturally, they probably are going to have a lot of views that would be probably negative about having all kinds of cultures. And then I was so nicely surprised that wasn't the case. And then the person who did find, said things that, that they come here and take our jobs and that kind of stuff was from somebody who had lived quite a number of years abroad.
Yes. Did she live in Brazil or something?
She did, yes. But the reality was that itself, you need to explore that. There was somebody who was in quite an enclosed area. It was fascinating. It was really fascinating. But of course, my eyes lit up when I saw unusual things happen, camaraderie between people you wouldn't expect, like somebody who was Irish and a traveller, and how beautifully they just complemented each other. And that's where you really see that humanity has none of this, them and us. There is just us.
Yeah.
Which is really beautiful to see.
Yes. It's interesting as well because there's a guy from a Loyalist marching band, the Orange Marches and that sort of thing. So there's a bit of coverage of that as well. And what he says is quite fascinating in that this is our cultural display, and if you believe those same things, we don't care what you look like, you're one of us. But anybody's welcome to come and see us and that sort of thing. So that was quite interesting to hear, and I don't know how people feel about that within and out with that. Yeah.
Well, I have to say, when I was filming that part, it was very, perhaps where it was, it didn't particularly feel welcoming.
Yes.
I stood out like a sore thumb, and I didn't mind. You've always been an outsider, so it doesn't really matter. And that particular conversation, again, very clearly there was two sides to that saw. That was the edges were very sharp on both sides. On the one hand, you say, anyone is welcome, but provided you do and say as I say and do and believe everything. Well, the world isn't filled with people who all believe the same thing. The whole point is that we are diverse. We have different experiences, and therefore welcome cannot be just to those who are exactly like me, because then it's not welcome. Welcome means an open door that allows people to be who they are, provided they don't actually harm you. It's an interesting thing to watch people's perceptions of what you would assume we all really believe to be the same thing. Welcome means, yes, come and welcome, but actually, no, it doesn't.
Yes.
Only if A, B, and C, you meet these criteria, then you're welcome. So then you're not welcome. So that was interesting too, yeah.
I have other friends who are artists who filmed at Orange marches and who are also women, and they're maybe actually from Protestant Unionist communities, but they're still outsiders because they're maybe from a different place in Northern Ireland, and then they're filming them in Belfast or whatever it happens to be. It can be so tight-knit that anybody's an outsider. Can take a long time to earn trust.
There were areas I wanted to film, and not just about people who are native to Northern Ireland.
Yes,
like that. It took me a long time to find anybody from the travelling community, and I was very lucky that I was able to find somebody and who just beautifully exemplified what it means to integrate with people, and that's not always the case. But I also from the Roma community, I just didn't manage, no matter how I couldn't get that. It's a very close-knit, close community. There was a lot of knocking on doors. This didn't, obviously, a huge part of any filmmaking, particularly when it's documentary, is your research that you're doing and trying to actually find the possibility to film. Possibly because I'm neither here nor there. I'm neither Catholic nor Protestant. I'm not from here. Possibly that made it more comfortable for people just because I was no threat. But I did, in one instance, I found that really bizarre because one of the people who was saying, they come here and take our jobs, the person who lived, for many years abroad, she spoke to me in such confidence that I share her view. Obviously, part of my job is, because I am welcoming, I want to hear and I don't want to say no and this and you can't. And there will be things that I'd feel, no, this is not a part of what I want to do. But, that wasn't that. I wanted to hear her story. I found it so intriguing to turn to me, somebody who clearly doesn't sound, okay, perhaps I don't sound like the typical immigrant who has recently come here, but I don't look Northern Irish. I definitely don't look like, even though I might sound more English, you can see it, my background must be from an immigrant, and as it happens, it's from a refugee kind of background. And yet to speak to me as though we speak that same language, they come here and take our jobs. And so often my thoughts, well, as you're speaking, I am one of the people you're talking about. Do you not see that I'm that in itself is a bit of a dichotomy, because you kind of think this individual obviously has humanity, who feels that can connect with you. Yet we all, from whatever background or whatever stories we have, we come to the perceptions that we come to arrive at.
It's important to include that social conditioning. It can only really be that sort of thing that I reckon that produces those sorts of attitudes, or I would see it as lack of logic in a way.
I mean, that for me was illogical, just to have that conversation with me. But then in another part of the film, someone speaks about his children being colourblind and not seeing difference between people, but the reality is there are differences, and you need to address those differences so that people are not underprivileged because of that difference, for that reason alone. But that the children growing up at the time, that was 2012 when I was filming, he was saying that his children are lucky to be, in that sense, they say they're colourblind. They don't see difference. And I suppose when I'm thinking of the lady that was talking to me and saying, they come here and take our job, do you see what I mean? That intimate conversation with me. In a way, she was being colourblind.
Yeah, because maybe she saw you as British because of your accent, and maybe that's an inverted form of accentism, or maybe it's people with funny foreign accents who... Or
that, a culture that... cultures are different. People's practices and lives are very different, and they don't sit comfortably always with each other, so... And that's a reality. It's not comfortable. So I can understand when somebody feels really, really uncomfortable when you have families that settle into your community whose ways and practices you're so unfamiliar with and you just don't understand. And it's hard on both sides. I think it really is, to find ways that... And it takes time. But I think more than anything, what helps is actually to be open to kind of meet each other somewhere along the way. It works both sides.
You can only really chat with somebody about those issues if they're able to safely talk about them, and the documentary allowed that space for somebody to very safely voice those concerns, because I think part of the problem around, we're still nearly 3 years in, over 3 years in, trying to deal with this Brexit stuff.
Yeah.
And so much anxiety about that has been people not feeling like they're allowed allowed to talk about how they feel. So maybe it's something like that. And I wonder, it's probably not fair of me to try and psychologise this person, but I wonder if there was an anxiety about having been away and then coming back, possibly, and maybe that was something this person was working through, but I don't know if it was that deep or not.
You know, everyone has a story, don't they? There were screenings that I went to, people I didn't know would come and say, you know, they were very nice about the film, and they were saying, gosh, you know, I was in your country, and they would tell me the stuff that they've done and the foods that they've tasted and all this stuff, as though I'm still there and I'm here as a visitor. I was just saying, listen, you know, as a child when I left, when I was living in Iran, my parents didn't come from, you know, well-off families. They worked really hard. My father came from poverty. So by the time I'd come along, and I was an afterthought, I think, there was 5 children, I was the 5th, and my eldest brother was almost 17 years older than me, so I really wasn't meant to be there. But by that stage, life had become a lot more comfortable for them. Because my family are Baha'i, and I'm a Baha'i as well, and Baha'is have been persecuted hugely in Iranian culture right from the start of the Baha'i faith. And incidentally, Baha'i teachings are about oneness of humanity, and you don't get involved in party politics, and it's really humanitarian kind of religion that really is about uniting, seeing the world as one and human beings as one. But these teachings were very threatening for governments and institutions and places where people had to blindly follow and be told what to do. So it's a whole history of persecution and executions. When I was growing up, none of that was there that I could see, but I was quite protected, I think. But there were undercurrents of it always. When the Iranian Revolution happened, things turned upside down. By that stage, we'd already been living in England. I had no history, no concept of that. I just heard it from my parents. My father had gone into early retirement, and he went back to Iran. The only means of our, financial support was his pension, and he'd managed to finish paying the mortgage for the house they had. So the tenancy was providing our living costs, and the tenants stopped paying. Right. So my father went back to see what was happening. It was at the stage when life was becoming very difficult for Baha'is. They introduced columns that if you wanted to leave the country, you had to say what religion you were. And of course my father couldn't put anything other than being a Baha'i, and he knew that could be very, very dangerous. So he ended up, instead of a couple of months, which was the intention, to be there for 4 years, and he escaped through the mountains of Turkey. Wow. Meanwhile, through the years, the house was confiscated, sold off, all the belongings were sold, his pension was stopped, and there was nothing. So we all had to become refugees as a result. So these stories are very real, although I have to say I never experienced the hardships of refugees. I was too young, so I was protected from all sorts, and I've heard of things. I know of my father and my mother, and I heard only recently from cousins who had known my dad and had said that the reason he left was his name had come up on a list and he was going to be executed. And his crime was that he was helping Baha'is who every belonging had been taken, so he was assisting with taking contributions from others to help them survive, and that was his crime. My goodness. There's all sorts of stories about refugees. I developed a very British kind of identity. My friends were all English, and I went to school in England then, and at the time the whole idea of being Iranian it felt very uncomfortable for me because I wanted to integrate into this new. I was then a teenager, and it's only later really that it began to dawn on me that the difficulties that refugees go through. And I suppose the film, when I was speaking to people who were coming from a different background, like the Bulgarian couple, the difficulties that they experienced arriving, not speaking the language and not knowing anything, not knowing the shops, and arriving in Newry, and how difficult it must have been for them. It's having by that stage heard so many of the stories that were familiar from family. Yeah, the film had all kinds of meaning for me, as well as opening it up for conversations.
I was thinking as well about an idea of a sense of home. You're talking about your own background as well. Yeah. And there's really moving part in the film where I think it's a Latvian woman talks about just hearing other people speak Latvian, and she wants to go over to them because she suddenly felt really homesick. Yeah. And just wanted that attachment back to something she felt she'd had to leave behind, but they didn't want to know because they just assumed she would want their help, and I just find that really sad as well. Yeah, and the reality is that exists a lot, and you can kind of understand both sides, but more the side of the person who's just arrived, and it's so difficult, so unfamiliar.
And now, I mean, I have quite a few friends who are from different backgrounds, and Latvians as well. It's lovely to see how integrated they are, but it's a long journey for many people. And I think you can't bring that home enough, the fact that people arrive not necessarily as their first choice, but because they have to. And what would you do if you have a family, your child, and you want to give them a hope, a home? Again, as I said, I'm a Baha'i, and I end the film with "The earth is but one country and mankind is its citizens." It's a quote from Baha'u'llah's writings, because really these borders are man-made borders.
Yes.
Really, there is only one globe that we all, there's only one earth that we live in, and how beautiful if we could actually see each other as one and be able to travel and be where we need to be, instead of thinking, oh, this bit is mine. Because ultimately, that's again from Baha'i writings, ultimately what you're fighting for is a piece of ground that you're going to be buried in. You don't take it with you. It's not, so why? It seems really bizarre to think of it as this is mine, and the whole nationalistic kind of approach that exists very much these days, in America and in Britain, in UK. You can see that, it's a very worrying thing that's happening globally in lots of places. So, but we have to hope.
I think that's what, with the title of the film, the tapestry idea, that's so beautiful, because, well, what's a tapestry? It's all of the different threads woven together, and they have to work together to be one thing. Even the image for it, the marketing image and the DVD image, the cover of it, it's all the different flags, really quite melded together in a way, in the shape of Northern Ireland, but there's that almost leakage into the Republic as well, because this is another arbitrary border which is now contested again because of what's happening.
The idea of the tapestry thing was because I was trying to make it into, and using my visual imagery and the digital imagery skills to kind of make that look like a tapestry and woven thing. And then the reality is that we are all threads of the same. Yes. There is no real difference in us, really. It seems so bizarre. But interestingly, when you talk about the flags, because obviously I was really careful to make sure everyone...
they're all in.
Yeah, they're all in. And so all the people who contributed in the film, a flag of their country is in. And I was so conscious that, particularly aware of the situation here, that the Irish and the British flag and the Hand of Ulster and all this kind of business all featuring. But there was one of the screenings, because when I had the preview at Lyric Theatre, there was all kinds of invited audience, VIPs and things, and it was wonderful. And then from that stemmed quite a lot of screenings. I was really working with councils and the good relations officers to see that if they could invite people that had something to say in their communities, so that there would be a panel discussion after the film, so that people don't come and sit and see it and then go. And those are really interesting, and obviously I was part of the panel, but I wanted to make sure local people were there. Really interesting. Most places, amazing conversations happened, but in one particular place, which will remain nameless, somebody actually walked out right at the start because the Irish flag looked a bit smaller than the British flag.
Oh, no.
I just thought, wow, that's so interesting to... there were very interesting conversations. And the film then, what sprang from the film was there's lots of people wanted to use it as an educational kind of tool, but it's too long. First, there was a lot of workshops that I was doing, councils were doing it, and I edited the film into sort of small extracts, thematic kind of extracts, that we could have sort of workshops and conversations about each of those, what they mean, and have that. The following year I was able to get some funding to do an educational resource, but that really I worked with within the sort of SEER, which is the curriculum examining board. One of the people there, and I sort of wanted to make sure it all ticked all the boxes for teachers so that they could teach it. And we had a pilot that went to a number of schools and youth groups, and it was really, really interesting, very positive kind of outcomes out of those. And just, it was impossible to continue it as an online resource because the costs involved, and because we couldn't get the funding then, or the schools couldn't raise the fundings to be able to have the programme for it. I mean, as a project, as a holistic project, I think a bit of film then led to other conversations that I felt worked really well. there was a lot of conversations I had with politicians as a result of it, which were also very interesting. It took me a whole new area and avenue of professional work that really, as an artist, is not my thing. Although I'm quite confident and I'm quite happy to present and talk about things, but then I just felt it's taking me further and further away from the artist and the creative,
I mean, with that, I don't know if that's something that just naturally came to a conclusion, or if the climate of things for the past few years has actually affected it as well, because not only is there the Brexit issue, but the fact that there's been no local government here for nearly 3 years, so everything's come to a standstill really with arts funding in general, I think.
Well, arts funding has been cut hugely anyway, but I think with the work that I was doing, I think it came to a point when I found I just was hitting my head against a brick wall, speaking, and really the number of fantastic conversations, presentations to various VIPs and heads of this and that and the other. While they were all wonderful, but really what I found, what I'm trying to do is having more funding to do further in the work. And it seemed like, as you say, it came to a point when it needed to stop, because the amount of time and energy that I was putting into that, which was not in any way rewarding, not just financially, but creatively, it wasn't rewarding in any way. And I did sort of do some work that was, I suppose that experience helped in the sort of rest of the work that I was doing as well. I did some creative consultations for the Arts Council when they were for some of the cities and towns that were doing building peace through the arts, dialogue they wanted to have. And those things and some of the other projects that I did, some of the filmic work that I did was, I'm sure at the back of Tapestry helped a lot with those. But I think that's come to a point where I feel now my passion needs to go back to what really, really touches my heart, which is art for its own sake.
In Tapestry of Colours, there's quite a bit of your own vocals in there. Is that something you'd like to talk about, is your singing and your vocalisation work?
Yeah, I mean the singing, I was in a band some years ago called Traceless, and we wrote the melodies and stuff I was doing. But at the time, first I was using a lot of the Baha'i writings because they're so beautiful and poetic. And then I was sort of writing the lyrics and stuff. But the film and documentary kind of soundtracks that I've sort of done some work on. There was a few things like Carol Moore's Pump Girl. She wanted me to do some music for the soundtrack. And the style of kind of work that I've done, again, on Tapestry, you can see it as well. With Tapestry, actually, the vocals for that initially was for a More 4-channel documentary called Monkey Love by Double Band. And it was about Harry Harlow, who was a psychologist who did some dubious work with baby monkeys in the 50s, and so they had a documentary. So I was approached by a friend of mine who was doing the soundtrack for it, and he'd heard my kind of more lyrical stuff. So it began kind of vocal recordings that were very much non-verbal, if you like, but it was much more about an earthy feeling and the undertones of Eastern sound into them. And a lot of that, I suppose, comes from when I was a child. I remember my father he had a beautiful voice. He used to sing, he used to chant Baha'i prayers. He had a voice like a melancholy bird, just beautiful. So I guess that stuck in my ear. And so one of the recordings from that ended up again on Tapestry. And then more recent years, I did some work for Grant Wakefield for his film Ancient Skies. So I went to England and worked with Toby Marks, aka Banco de Gaia. So we recorded some vocal recordings. Now he actually had Lisa Gerrard, and she then had pulled out, and he was looking for somebody who did that kind of thing. And again, my friend who I'd done the stuff for the Double Band film had told him about me. So I sent him some stuff, and then he liked it and went over. I think that was a very beautiful, creative, heartfelt experience, because I just asked them to put on some chords, leave the room, and let me improvise.
Wow.
And that's how those came about. And there were a couple of those tracks featured on Apollo, which was Banco de Gaia's comeback album. I felt very happy. I felt very happy with those creative efforts.
That sounds like a great way of collaborating, where they just ask them to trust you. And
that kind of singing is very much you're singing your heart. Your soul is singing. So it's not a press a button and here it comes. It has to be. And he knew I guess that's why he asked me to do it, because he'd heard the other stuff that I'd done. We had to just try it, and it seemed to work, and he was happy with it. But each of those are very much associated with a particularly poignant emotional experience that I was having at the time, so I had to tap into that and really sing for that. So it seemed to work.
They're really haunting, and they're very beautiful to listen to. There's the Eastern influence, but there was something in there that just made me think of an Irish connection as well, because there's the keening that's done by women at funeral wakes. in Ireland, and it's this cry from within when you can't cry. It's hard to explain. It's a sound that comes from within, and it's something between crying and singing and wailing. It's quite an incredible thing to behold, and it reminded me of that as well, actually, listening to it, because it does feel like it's from the heart. There is something distinctive because it does actually sound live, whereas so much music is processed, voices are processed, and I'm going to put some links up on our socials because they're really incredible.
Actually, somebody told me that originally there are links between the Celts and the Persians.
Right.
But whether that's true or not, but maybe intrinsically there is something there.
Yeah, I've done quite a bit of research in the past few years on the ancient worlds and trying to see what's mythical and what's not. And I think historians, for a couple of 100 years at least, there were making everything very separate, and actually there's a lot of revisionist research going on saying no, there is a lot of evidence that everybody was more joined up than you're allowing people to believe, so that wouldn't surprise me.
Isn't it a symbolic thing about the fact that we actually one?
It's all about colonial civilizing missions, making people other, when actually people were coming together and trading, and there were areas that weren't so much colonial, but say a Greek tribe would go to one place in Egypt, maybe Alexandria or nearby, and they would have a joint community. They would actually have a Greco-Egyptian community that was shared, and they would share deities and things. So that would be amazing, yes, if that's true, and it wouldn't surprise me.
It was a poet, an Irish poet told me, so I don't know, I hope it's true. It sounds nice.
Yes, it does, yes. Sounds like there would be an affinity, I think, for sure.
Yeah, because it's a bit of a lament, isn't it, the whole thing, isn't it? Yeah. And mostly I'm often singing to my son. Yeah, because he's intertwined with my heart.
Would you like to talk about, from a few years ago, some of the projects you were commissioned to do with the Arts Council, or some of the short films?
So a few years ago there was a project that I did that consisted of 5 films, and it was for, I think she still exists, there's a few communities in North Belfast, and it's called Draw Down the Walls. And for that particular year, in 2015, they commissioned 5 short films working with 5 groups of people. It was about invisible barriers and exploring that. I love actually working with people and finding very kind of unusual creative ways to draw out stories from people. And it was really nice because there was a couple of groups that were in Lower Shankill. And there was one group in the Ardoyne area, and there was one group that were unemployed people, and there was another group that was actually just young people who wanted to make films. So it was a variety of kind of experiences, and to explore that sense of otherness, you know, and belonging and not belonging. And I heard some really fascinating stories. Particularly, I think what moved me was the Lower Shankill adults. I did some work with the younger people, but it was the Lower Shankill adults that I found really fascinating. A lot of them were telling me the stories of people who had been imprisoned and really hard lives, lots of suicides, and the difficulties of the young people and the people who had been in previous times involved in paramilitary groups, and how that community is affected by it. And yet, I have to say, it was one of the loveliest, kindest group of people I met. They were so genuinely very welcoming. That was a real eye-opener for me. Difficult areas to live in. So those 5 films were then shown as part of a mini festival that happened. Belfast Film Festival was hosting them. So they happened in a number of areas, and then for a month they were shown at the City Hall, and then the publication was based on it, was produced, and then it did a touring kind of thing around. So it was an interesting, very difficult project, I have to say. Difficult project, but really interesting. But I did meet some really beautiful people that I found. So again, breaks all your preconceptions, which was really nice. Really nice,
We can actually view those films on your website.
They're on my Vimeo, kind of the Vimeo page as well, so that you could see those. Really interesting, exploring what really all that means, and just breaking those barriers, which we all have. I found the ones that were really responsive to my very wacky, bizarre, every day I'll come up with some strange way of exploring things, were the young people who actually met at the Golden Thread Gallery, because they were just up for it. It was great. It was really good. So yeah, there was so many parts of that I really felt was a very worthwhile, really positive project.
But would you like to talk about the residency with Tyrone Guthrie?
Yeah. So this is what really is my baby now.
Oh.
So for quite a while I had this idea that I wanted to explore, again, dance and movement through the lens, and finding ways to really, there is a distance between the performer and the audience. There's a line. And I think I have experienced it when I've been at a performance, that when I'm so mesmerized, I'm so immersed in what I'm seeing, experiencing, that I'm becoming a part of it, if you know what I mean, because it's so beautifully done. There are a few things that I've been to, always contemporary dance. The most beautiful will be Russell Malafant's Afterlight. So my heart just is wrenched, just being not even an observer. I'm part of that. I become that as I'm watching it. I become the performer, even though I'm not a performer. So I really want to explore that place where you go beyond this world almost. It's an other world. It's an otherworldly experience. It's a higher consciousness. It's spiritual. It's a different realm. I'm fascinated to reside moments in that. And I wanted to explore that through movement and dance. And I was lucky enough to meet and photograph a beautiful dancer who's partially sighted called Helen Hall. Beautiful movement, beautiful body, and so I wanted to work around that. So I had applied for a residency some time before, and so I was able to do it at that time. So I went to Tyrone Guthrie. Now imagine this, this is in June of 2018, when the summer was amazing. So for anybody who hasn't been there, it's really beautiful grounds, all green, and there's a lake. And the sun beaming every day, and I had a cottage to myself, and I had a studio to myself. I took everything, and I wanted to animate, so I was able to animate the movements, and the idea really is, it's a bit of a dream for me to have an installation performance kind of thing based on this. This is like the start of a project. So I was able to really get started into that and produce the kind of work and sounds and things that I felt really would work with it. It was just a dream of a time there for me. I just was immersed into that. It really was so beautiful. And the people were so lovely. I met some really wonderful artists as well. I'm so fascinated also by the academic side of things, where academia merges with creativity. That's so beautiful. So I'd really like to see if I can take this off into a sort of proper research of a PhD, but a practice-based PhD where I can produce works, but really look at the kind of the intellectual side behind it as well, but really touch a realm that is, for me, is so fascinating. And we'll see. I've written a proposal, but we'll see if it'll go anywhere.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, if it's meant to be.
Well, hopefully it's finding the right place to do something like that is the tricky part.
Yeah, I mean, if I live in Northern Ireland now, and one of the things I did last year was to build a lovely studio space. So I don't plan to be moving anytime soon. So if I can do it through here, university here would be great, or if I was able to do it somewhere else, but I could actually continue to stay here. And so we'll see. I'll explore possibilities and see what happens.
So as well as the PhD idea, well, you were saying that you've got really into your painting again.
Yeah, I've started to get, because the whole idea of, Tyrone Guthrie was that I begin to bring in all elements of the things that are tied up into my creative practice. So painting was, I exhibited in a few different places before, and I hadn't been painting for a while. And the figure always features not portraits, but again movement and limbs and bodies, and so again starting to see if I can reconnect with painting again. It's a slow process, but I've started that, so I've got paintings again on the go. So we'll see. Yeah. I just think it's with creativity, it's, for me, it hasn't been a career; it's a vocation, if you like. Although thankfully it's earned me enough to be able to live off, often on and off. But generally, it's not something that you then stop. It needs to be something that actually is at the core of what you do.
And again, it's that idea of creative practice, or the creative impulse being a borderless thing as well.
Yeah, a long time ago I remember speaking to somebody about being an artist, and at the time I hadn't painted anything, and he was saying, but you're not painting. I remember thinking, I felt very annoyed and thinking, but you're an artist, it's a part of who you are, it's woven into it. It's not when you paint that you're an artist, it's not when you write, it's just who you are. And I think it's even in everyday conversations.
Yes.
It's just looking at things in a creative way, or hearing things in a different way.
So if you want to direct anybody to find out a bit more about what you do or see some of your work,
You can see some of my work on my website, zmncreativestudio.co.uk, and some of my film work are on my Vimeo channel. But also my email is there, you can contact me. I'm always open for interesting ideas, and particularly when different art forms merge. That's what I find the most fascinating.
Yeah.
Where there's music and sound and dance and painting and animation, just where it goes, yeah. And it's a like-minded sort of souls that kind of connect, I think. I love the idea of that. So, yeah, I'm always open to possibilities.
Shania, thank you so much. I can't thank you enough.
Oh,
for
thank
the
you.
time. And I am in love with your dog.
Yes, and creatively training a dog. That's another thing I do. She knows lots of tricks,
Oh yeah, I don't doubt
It's a
it.
pity you can't see her tricks
I know.
on an audio thing. But I will show you once this tape is over. No, she's a sweetheart. Yeah, but it's just thank you very much for remembering after all these years.
You've been listening to Audiovisual Cultures with very special guests Shania Madinau and Tessa the dog. This episode was presented, recorded, edited and produced by Paula Blair. The music is Common Ground by Airtone, licensed under a Creative Commons non-commercial license, and is available for download from ccmixter.org. Episodes are released every other Wednesday. Please rate, share and subscribe on your chosen listening platform to help others find the show. To help cover costs of making and distributing the podcast, please consider making a regular donation via liberapay.com/PEA Blair, or one-off donations to paypal.me/PEA Blair. Just £1 or whatever you can spare is a really massive help. Follow AV Cultures Pod on Instagram and AV Cultures on Twitter and Facebook to keep up with what we're doing. Thanks so much for listening, and catch you next time.